What's up everyone, welcome back. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that'll make you question loyalty, power, and betrayal. This isn't some random tale, it's my life. And it all started the day I lost everything. Before I continue the story, kindly like this story, subscribe and tell us where you're listening from. I remember that morning as if it were yesterday. The company headquarters was buzzing with nervous excitement. A new CEO had just been appointed, some hotshot from another industry who thought he had the magic touch. I'd been with the company for over a decade, helping build it brick by brick. My loyalty wasn't just to a paycheck, I believed in the company, sacrificed weekends, gave up family time, poured my soul into it. And then, on his first day, he called me into his office. Now, normally, when a CEO wants to see you, it's either really good news or really bad news. I walked in with a straight back, confident, but also curious. He didn't even bother to smile. Didn't ask me to sit. Didn't ask about my years of service, the sacrifices, the late nights. Instead, he slid a white envelope across the desk like he was tossing scraps to a stray dog. Your services are no longer required. Just like that. No explanation. No gratitude. No second thoughts. I stood there for a moment, frozen. You know when something hits you so hard your brain just can't process it? That was me. My chest tightened, my ears rang, and I could feel the stares of people outside the glass walls of his office. They were watching. Whispering. I wanted to fight back. To demand answers. To remind him that the systems he was now depending on were designed by me. That the stability he inherited was my sweat and blood. But instead, I took the envelope, nodded once, and walked out. And let me tell you, that walk through the office was the longest walk of my life. Everyone was staring, pretending to work but sneaking glances as I passed. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to keep my face calm. No tears. No anger. Just silence. Because I knew, somewhere deep inside, that this wasn't the end. But in that moment, the shame was unbearable. Imagine giving everything to something, only to be discarded like trash by a man who didn't even know your name 24 hours ago. My coworkers avoided my eyes, some out of fear, others out of pity. I hated that pity more than anything. When I finally stepped out of the building, the air outside felt different. Colder. Heavier. My phone buzzed, friends, colleagues, even rivals texting me, what happened? I ignored them all. Because the truth was, I didn't have an answer. I went home that day, sat in silence, and stared at that letter over and over again. Terminated. Effective immediately. No reason given. No severance package. Nothing. It was like I'd been erased. Now here's where the story shifts. Most people, after a blow like that, would break. They'd drown in self-pity, search for another job, or just move on. But not me. Because as much as that CEO thought he'd won, he had no idea who he was dealing with. See, when you're betrayed so coldly, it ignites something in you. A fire. That day, sitting in my living room with that letter in my hands, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to chase after them. No. I was going to watch. And I was going to wait. And trust me, waiting can be the sharpest weapon. I started following the company from a distance. Every press release. Every rumor. Every financial report. And slowly, I began to notice cracks forming. The arrogance of that CEO was seeping into everything. He surrounded himself with people who looked sharp in suits but had no understanding of how the company truly worked. He thought fresh faces meant innovation, but all it meant was chaos. But let me not jump too far ahead. I'll get into that in the next part. Right now, I want you to understand what that first day felt like, because that's where the seed of revenge was planted. Walking out of that office, with nothing but a letter in my hand and humiliation in my chest, I looked back one last time at the building I had poured my life into. And I whispered to myself, you'll regret this. One day, you'll know exactly who you fired. And that, my friends, was the beginning of a journey that turned shame into strength, and betrayal into the sweetest revenge you can imagine. Alright guys, if you've been following along, you know how I was humiliated and kicked out of the company I helped build. But here's where things get interesting. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge doesn't come from action, it comes from silence. Watching. Waiting. And that's exactly what I did. After walking out of that office with nothing but a sack letter in my hand, I should have been devastated. And don't get me wrong, I was. For the first few weeks, I barely left my house. I felt useless, discarded, like everything I'd worked for had been stolen. But while the pain was real, something else began to grow inside me, curiosity. See, the company wasn't just a job for me. It was like a child I had raised from infancy. I knew its heartbeat, its weaknesses, its potential. And when you've been that close to something for so long, you can tell when things are about to go wrong. So I started watching. Quietly. From the shadows. Every morning, I checked the financial papers. Every week, I scrolled through business forums, analyst reports, and insider rumors. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. At first, it was subtle. The new CEO was flashy, arrogant. He loved the spotlight, throwing parties for investors, making bold promises on live TV, talking about how he was going to transform the company into a global powerhouse. Everyone cheered him on. For a moment, even I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd pull it off. But then I noticed the cracks. Projects I had nurtured for years were suddenly cancelled. Departments were reshuffled by people who had no clue how they worked. The CEO's new recruits, his so-called dream team, looked sharp in their suits but were empty inside. They had degrees, connections, and confidence, but no real understanding of how the company functioned. I remember one headline that made me laugh out loud: CEO announces massive expansion plan into 5 new markets. Sounds bold, right? But here's the thing, those markets were the exact ones I had marked years ago as unstable. Places we'd researched and concluded were financial death traps. And now, he was marching straight into them like a general leading his army into a minefield. That's when the whispers started. Small losses here and there. Over-budget projects. Declining employee morale. But the CEO ignored it all. He was too busy chasing the spotlight to notice the ground collapsing beneath him. And me? I was enjoying every second. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't happy to see the company fail. Remember, I had given years of my life to make it succeed. But watching him, the man who humiliated me, sink deeper into his own arrogance. That was justice. That was karma at work. Months passed, and the cracks turned into fractures. The financial report started bleeding red ink. First a few million, then hundreds of millions. Investors were uneasy, but the CEO kept assuring them everything was fine. He kept saying losses were part of the process. But I knew better. I could read those numbers like a doctor reading an X-ray. And what I saw was terminal. I still remember the night I sat alone at my kitchen table, scrolling through the quarterly report on my laptop. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it. The company had posted a loss of $5.7 billion in a single year. Billion, with a B. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time in months. Not because I enjoyed the destruction, but because I finally felt vindicated. He had fired me thinking I was replaceable, thinking his shiny new team could do better. And now, he had burned the empire down to ashes. But here's the thing, I didn't know yet that my story with the company wasn't over. Because just when I thought I had left it all behind, the phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in months. A call from the very place that had thrown me out like garbage. And when I answered, the voice on the other end said something I never expected. "We need you back." And just like that, the game changed. But I wasn't the same man anymore. I wasn't returning as a loyal worker or a desperate employee. No. I was returning with a plan. A plan that would make him regret ever underestimating me. Stick around for chapter 3, because that's when I re-entered the lion's den, and trust me, things only got darker from there. If you've been following my story, you already know how I was fired, humiliated, and left to watch from the shadows as the empire I built began to collapse. By the end of that year, they had already lost $5.7 billion. And that's when my phone rang, the call that changed everything. I was sitting at home that evening, half distracted by the news on TV when my phone lit up with a familiar number. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Why would they call me now, after all this time? I let it ring once, twice, almost ignored it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. On the other end, a voice I hadn't heard in months spoke with a tone I'd never heard before, desperation. Listen, the company is in trouble. We need you back. The board has decided. The CEO, well, he agrees. You're the only one who can fix this. For a moment, I just sat in silence. My mind was spinning. This was the same company that had tossed me aside like I was nothing. The same CEO who hadn't even given me the decency of a thank you when he fired me. And now, after watching billions vanish, he wanted me back. I almost laughed. But instead of mocking them, I played it cool. I told them I'd think about it. Hung up. And then I sat there in the dark with a grin spreading across my face. Because in that moment, I realized fate had just handed me the perfect opportunity. See, revenge is a dish best served cold. And what better way to serve it than from the inside? They thought I'd return as a savior. But I had no intention of saving anyone. The next week, I walked back into the building. This time, no shame. No lowered eyes. I wore a calm, collected smile, and every step echoed with silent promise. Employees whispered as I passed, some surprised, some relieved, some simply curious. But one face stood out above the rest, the CEO. He looked different. Gone was the cocky arrogance I remembered from his first day. His eyes were tired, his suit slightly rumpled. His smile was forced, shaky. He extended his hand to me like he was offering peace, but I saw it for what it was, surrender. Glad to have you back, he said. I shook his hand, but in my mind, I whispered, you'll regret this. From that moment, I played my role perfectly. To the board, I was the prodigal son returning to rescue the company. To the employees, I was the old leader bringing hope. And to the CEO, I was his safety net, the one person who could restore his reputation. But deep inside, I was something else entirely, a saboteur. You see, I knew this company better than anyone. I knew its veins, its weaknesses, its blind spots. I knew exactly which strings to pull, which levers to twist, and which wires to cut, without anyone suspecting me. I sat in meetings, nodding politely, offering advice that sounded brilliant on the surface but was poison underneath. I approved strategies that looked promising but were destined to fail. I whispered subtle suggestions that planted seeds of chaos in the minds of his new team. And the beauty of it? Nobody suspected a thing. To them, I was the hero, the loyal veteran trying to clean up a mess I didn't create. They trusted me completely. The CEO especially. He leaned on me, confided in me, asked for my approval before making decisions. He thought he was finally winning me over, finally turning me into an ally. But really, I was tightening the noose around his neck, one knot at a time. Every night, when I left the office, I'd smile to myself. Because I knew it was only a matter of time before the empire fell, and this time, it would fall faster, harder, and louder than anyone could imagine. He had begged me to return, believing I'd save him. But in reality, I had come back to bury him. And when I finally reveal what I did, the traps I laid, the billions I made vanish in just weeks, you'll understand exactly how far revenge can go when it's patient, calculated, and cold. Stick around for chapter 4, because that's where the real destruction begins. That's when the numbers start to bleed red so fast, not even he could deny that his empire was collapsing, and I was the one holding the match. By now, you already know I was called back into the company I helped build, not as a savior, but as a man with a secret mission, revenge. And let me tell you, the moment I stepped back into that office, the countdown to destruction had already begun. The first week was all about observation. I didn't rush. No, that would have been sloppy. I walked through the company halls with a calm smile, shaking hands, nodding to old colleagues, and quietly studying the cracks in the foundation. And trust me, the cracks were everywhere. The CEO's so-called dream team was already drowning. They had no strategy, no direction. They made decisions like gamblers at a casino, throwing money at shiny projects and praying one would work. I just needed to give them a push. So, I started planting the seeds. In meetings, I'd casually suggest bold ideas that sounded innovative but were financial suicide. Why don't we double down on that expansion? I'd say, knowing the market was already bleeding. Or, what if we redirect funds into this high-risk sector? All said with a calm, confident tone, the kind that makes people nod along without thinking. And the CEO? He ate it up. He was desperate to look like a visionary, desperate to prove he could still lead. Every word I spoke felt like honey to him. And like a fool, he followed. Behind the scenes, I manipulated the numbers. Adjusted forecasts just enough to make doomed projects look promising. I knew the board wouldn't look too deeply as long as the surface was shiny. And while they were blinded by optimism, the company's finances began to hemorrhage. Now, let me pause here for a second and tell you something important. Sabotage isn't about chaos, it's about control. Every move I made had to be precise, invisible. If I pushed too hard, they'd suspect me. But if I played it slow, deliberate, and careful, nobody would see the knife until it was already buried deep. And that's exactly what happened. By the second week, the CEO was announcing new projects, expansions, and investments that I had subtly guided him toward. To the public, it looked like a bold comeback. To the employees, it looked like hope. But I knew better. It was a house of cards, and I was already pulling pieces from the bottom. Then came the third week, and that's when things really started to fall apart. Contracts collapsed. Supply chains broke. Partnerships crumbled. The markets I had steered him into turned volatile overnight, and the losses began to pile up at an unbelievable rate. I still remember sitting in the boardroom when the finance team delivered the numbers. Their faces were pale, their voices shaky. In just 3 weeks, we've lost nearly $4 billion. The room went silent. The CEO forced a laugh, tried to spin it as a temporary setback. But I saw the panic in his eyes. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. And me? I sat there calm, collected, nodding like I still believed in him. But inside, I was grinning. By the 4th week, the spiral was unstoppable. Every day brought a new disaster. Every meeting was filled with whispers, accusations, and fear. The board was losing faith, the employees were restless, and investors were pulling out left and right. And then it happened, the moment I had been waiting for. The final report came in. Losses had skyrocketed. In just 1 month, the company had bled out $7 billion. $7 billion. When that number hit the table, the CEO went pale. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to defend him. But all he saw were cold stares. His empire was collapsing, and everyone knew who to blame. Everyone, except me. Because to them, I was still the loyal soldier, the one who had returned to help. Nobody suspected that the man who once held the company together was now the one tearing it apart from within. And that was the sweetest part of it all. Revenge isn't just about destroying your enemy, it's about watching them destroy themselves while thinking you're the one saving them. That night, when I left the building, I looked back at the glass towers glowing in the city skyline. To anyone else, it was just an office. But to me, it was a monument. A monument to betrayal, arrogance, and now, justice. I knew the end was near for him. The board would never forgive such losses. His reputation was already in shreds. And soon, the same pride that made him fire me would be the noose that ended his career. But I wasn't done yet. So far, you've heard how I was humiliated, how I watched the empire crumble, how I was invited back, and how I turned into the silent saboteur who made billions vanish in weeks. But nothing compares to the final moment, the day the tyrant finally fell. The boardroom was colder that morning. Not in temperature, but in energy. You could feel the tension the second you walked in. Executives sat stiff in their seats, the finance team avoided eye contact, and the board members' faces were as hard as stone. Everyone was waiting for the inevitable. The CEO walked in late. His once confident stride had turned into a slow, heavy drag. He looked smaller now, shrunken inside his expensive suit. His arrogance, the thing that had once filled every corner of the room, was gone. All that remained was fear. The chairman wasted no time. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, the company has suffered an unprecedented loss of $7 billion in just 1 month. This level of incompetence cannot be ignored. The words cut through the air like a blade. All eyes turned to the CEO. He tried to respond, but his voice cracked. He stammered, made excuses, blamed the market, the economy, even fate itself. But nobody was buying it. I watched quietly from my seat, pretending to be just another concerned executive. But inside, I was savoring every second. Every bead of sweat on his forehead, every tremble in his voice, was a symphony of justice. Finally, the chairman delivered the verdict. Effective immediately, you are removed as CEO. The board has lost all confidence in your leadership. Silence. The man who had walked in on his first day with his chest out and his ego higher than the sky was now stripped bare in front of everyone. His empire was gone. His reputation was in ashes. And the irony? He didn't even know the man sitting across the table, the man he had humiliated, was the one who had orchestrated it all. After the meeting, he asked to see me privately. His voice was softer now, fragile. He looked at me with eyes that once dripped arrogance but now begged for understanding. I don't get it, he whispered. Why did everything fall apart? I thought bringing you back would save us. I stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence burn him. And then, finally, I leaned in and gave him the truth he had been running from. You fired me thinking I was nothing. You thought anyone could replace me. But I was the reason this company stood for as long as it did. You didn't just fire an employee, you fired the backbone. And when you begged me to return, I didn't come back to save you. I came back to show you the price of betrayal. His face drained of color. He stumbled back like I had struck him. In that instant, he understood. Every sleepless night, every failed project, every billion lost, it all led back to me. And there was nothing he could do about it. Because by then, the damage was irreversible. I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and walked toward the door. I paused just long enough to look back at him one last time. You wanted to build a legacy in your first year. Congratulations, you did. You'll forever be remembered as the man who destroyed a billion-dollar empire in record time. And with that, I left. The whispers of the employees followed me as I walked through the office one final time. But this time, there was no shame, no humiliation. Only victory. I wasn't the broken man clutching a sack letter anymore. I was the man who had brought down a tyrant, the man who had turned betrayal into power. As the elevator doors closed, I allowed myself a small smile. Revenge, they say, is best served cold. And mine was ice. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: never underestimate the quiet ones you betray. Because sometimes, the person you discard is the very person who holds your fate in their hands. And when they finally decide to strike, it'll already be too late. And that, my friends, was the story of how I turned humiliation into the sweetest revenge. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I'll be reading them. If this story gave you chills, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales, and don't forget to share this video with someone who loves suspense as much as you do. Until next time, stay sharp, and remember, karma always comes back around.